Hi, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to make this video today. I am going to talk about my very favorite nonfiction that I have read this year. So I noticed in the past year that I have probably read more nonfiction than is typical for me anyway. And I read so many really good ones, and I found that some of my favorite books of the year have been my nonfiction reads. I'm really excited to talk about some of the really amazing nonfiction that I have read in 2022. So to start out with an excellent book, but also very heavy, I read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, An Indian History of the American West by D. Brown. And this is just a history of the destruction of Native peoples across the Americas during the second half of the 19th century. And so it is very difficult to read at parts. Super horrible, but so well done, so meticulously written, so much information, and I feel like it's just like necessary reading. Like everybody should pick this up, especially if you live or have lived in the US and you want to understand what has gone on United States soil. This is super important. I thought that it was a really well done book. So for a fascinating read, I read American Sherlock, Murder, Forensics, and the Birth of American CSI by Kate Winkler Dawson. So this is following a famous scientist and his use of deductive reasoning, kind of being like Sherlock Holmes to solve cases, and how he was able to kind of start the practice of CSI and to see what has happened with that since then. What has happened with the use of forensic in criminal cases in current day, and what is good and what just isn't even accurate but is still used to prove guilt in a criminal court today. So super interesting. I think anybody would be very interested in this. One that stuck with me a lot is I read Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City by Matthew Desmond. And this is just following like the history of evictions. He's talking to lots of people who have been evicted and have been evicted multiple times, and how that has affected their lives and the laws surrounding that. And it was very eye-opening and useful reading on a lot of that. I really did enjoy the book The Doctors Blackwell, How Two Pioneering Sisters Brought Medicine to Women and Women to Medicine by Janice P. Nimura, and I thought this was super interesting. I know it's been talked about a lot on BookTube. Just learning how these sisters fought their way to go to medical school and really changed the medical profession, especially for women. I thought it was really interesting, and an interesting look into just the attitudes of the time. I read a harrowing account of the famine in Ukraine, in Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine, 1921 through 1933, by Anne Applebaum. And this is following exactly what it says in the title, a story of a famine that was basically constructed by Stalin, and just the accounts of people dying, and it was awful. It was also good background to understand current political climates, and I thought it was very interesting, so I learned a lot from this one. I definitely think it was worth a read. I really enjoyed The Sinner and the Saint, Dostoevsky and the Gentleman Murderer Who Inspired a Masterpiece by Kevin Birmingham. I really enjoyed Crime and Punishment when I was back in school reading it, and to kind of go through some of the background on what inspired these stories and how Dostoevsky came about to write his masterpiece. I thought it was super interesting. So I don't know if this book is for everyone, but I really enjoyed my time with it. An absolutely amazing read was The Unwomanly Face of War, An Oral History of Women in World War II by Svetlana Alexievich. And I found this book to be amazing and difficult. I mean, any book about war is going to be difficult, but it was also such a necessary perspective to see women's roles in war, especially seeing, it was very interesting, especially to see the perspective of Russia and of women. I thought that it was a perspective of World War II that we don't get very often, and was very, very well done. I read Alexander the Great by Philip Freeman. Excellent. If you want to know all about Alexander the Great, jump in on here. I feel like it gave me such a good foundation for knowing a lot about Alexander the Great. Very interesting, informative, and kept me moving through it. So if you want to know more about this subject, I think you would like this one. I read Covered with Night, A Story of Murder and Indigenous Justice in Early America by Nicole Eustace. And I found this story of early colonist and native relations and their ideas of justice and how they clashed and trying to get along in early America. I thought it was super interesting, made me really think about how things could be reimagined if the colonists had been more willing to discuss things and learn from the native peoples, and I thought that it was a very interesting and well done book. So a very different book was All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley Sack, A Black Family Keepsake by Taya Miles, and this is following a simple sack that had some words embroidered on it and was passing through generations of enslaved people, and it just really talks about family loss and the true human toll of slavery in the United States. And I thought that it was really an interesting perspective because it really is following this artifact and what happened to it throughout time. But I thought that it was just really well done and painted a very vivid picture and of, you know, families reaching towards each other through horrible circumstances, and I thought that it was really, really well done. For a book on science, I really enjoyed The Gene, An Intimate History by Siddhartha Mukherjee, and I thought this was super cool. If you just want to know about genetics, the history of our study of genetics, what currently is going on with genetics, I thought this was really interesting and super readable. You know, like, it's not one of those science books where none of it really makes sense. I feel like you definitely could read this not knowing anything and then come away feeling like you've learned a lot. And so I think it's kind of for all levels and also just gives, you know, good overview on a lot of what there is to know about genetics. This is a more recent read, but I read The Woman They Could Not Silence, One Woman, Her Incredible Fight for Freedom, and the Men Who Tried to Make Her Disappear by Kate Moore. And this is following a woman who was sent to a mental asylum by her husband because she had opinions and independent thoughts. And just this woman's fight to be recognized as sane, be able to be free and get back to her children, and also just her amazing fight for rights for others and for advocating for those that didn't have a voice. I thought that it was inspiring and super interesting and highly recommend. I learned a lot and also just came away like, wow, that was amazing. Also, it did make some connections into how things are portrayed in current days, and I thought that that was important as well. Moving on to a few books that are a little more on the memoir side, I read Heavy by Casey Lemon, and this was a memoir, an exploration of growing up larger and Black, and it was a really meaningful memoir. I thought there were a lot of interesting points that he brought up and difficult things that he's lived through, and it was definitely a worthwhile read. I completely adored 10 Steps to Nanette by Hannah Gadsby. I actually got to see her live and she was amazing, and if you've seen her Netflix specials, you'll love the book. Definitely worth picking up. I think she is delightful, meaningful, and while some parts of her book were very difficult to read and she went through some very difficult things, I thought that the way she presented it was amazing and important, and yeah, highly recommend. Really love Hannah Gadsby. Another memoir that was excellent was Unbound, My Story of Liberation and the Birth of the Me Too Movement by Tarana Burke. This had a difficult subject matter, but also was very important, learning about her life and how she has worked to advocate for people and help them with the Me Too movement. And I thought that it was excellent, definitely worth a read. And the cover art on this, absolutely gorgeous. So I read the book The Sun Does Shine, How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row by Anthony Ray Hinton. And this is following a man who was wrongfully convicted of a crime and sent to death row for 30 years before he was released. And this was inspiring and heartbreaking and definitely worth a read. Along with that last one, I read the book Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption by Bryan Stevenson, and he was the lawyer that helped Anthony Ray Hinton get free after 30 years. And this was following Bryan Stevenson's cases that he worked on to reduce people's sentences, help people who were wrongfully imprisoned, and it's filled with the most heartbreaking cases that you will see in the criminal justice system, and just his fight for changing things. I thought it was inspiring and made me want to do more. It was just excellent. So if you are interested in the criminal justice system in the US, how sentencing, prison, anything, I think both of these books are really amazing, and I'm glad that I read both of them. And that is it for the best nonfiction that I have read in the year 2022. I have really had a good year with nonfiction. There have been some really good reads, and there are a lot of books that I could have added to this list. These were just like my very top rated ones, but there were so many good nonfiction books that I read this year. So if you've read any of these books, please let me know what you've thought of them. And if you've read any other nonfiction books this year that have really stood out to you, let me know, because I am enjoying this nonfiction train and I will keep going. So let me know. And I hope you are all having a wonderful holiday season. I'll see you on the next one.